The Night. The Roaring Night. They made their debut in Chapter 3, showing up a little late, but just in time to cleave Tenna Red and duel with the heroes strife by strife. If you're curious and skilled enough, you might just find a way to outlast them. And with a final strike, you can go just a little off script. But not that off script. This is an endgame boss, and it would just be wrong for them to get taken out too early. So, to set things right, they win like they're supposed to. 2 swift strikes. And 1 heart to heart. Deltarune, much like Undertale before it, has chosen a concept to serve as the foundation for its narrative and meta-narrative. It's something that, much like saving and loading, is meant to subvert an expectation you enter the game holding. In Deltarune's case, that being that you are the one you play as. Especially in games with silent protagonists, the typical assumption is that what you feel is what they feel. What you think is what they think. The character you customize, that you designed to look just like you, the one that you named and grinded to get the best gear for, that tends to be you. Deltarune knows this, and it disagrees. The silent hero that carries your soul doesn't feel how you do about the story's antagonist. To draw the line clear where anyone can see it, Deltarune has chosen to fracture Chris in 2. Chris Dreamer, and what they call Chris Dreamer. Chris is a bringer of light, the hero whose heart shines the way for them and their friends, and the one sealing away the darkness that could end the world. But, when no one is looking, as their soul comes out, so too does the real Chris. They aren't looking to help open the shelter, at least not yet. They aren't stuck searching for answers in the dark, at least not as much as people like Susie think. And they aren't against the villains. So does that make them one? This dual nature is Toby's genius attempt to further reinforce what this game has already told you. That you can't choose who you are in this world. The decision to put the true Chris Dreamer on the side of the night has made it completely inarguable that you are not them, as every time you try to break out of the bounds of what their role should allow, your cage will keep you trapped and limit just how free you're allowed to be. There's a plan that has to come to pass, a story that needs to be told, and a wild card like you, with the power you have, is best used when contained. That said, Chris and the Knight aren't just reluctantly working together, are they? More than anyone else actively against the heroes, there seems to be a clear connection between the Roaring Knight and some very key aspects of Chris. They're the first one that seems to be working with the real Chris, and know the true nature of who they are. It's set within their roles, how one brings the darkness that the other's light seals away. Look at how they pose, as if there's something there worth taking inspiration from. Look at how they move, as if there's something similar troubling them both. And under that helmet, there's someone worth hiding. Someone Chris would rather us not know is in the role that they are. With all of these similarities, it stands that Chris doesn't just know who the Knight is. There's someone they hold a very clear bond with. Even just from a writing perspective, to connect the two on the level they've been connected wouldn't be done if it wasn't meant to suggest something. The Knight is a person Chris would forsake their friends to work alongside. The Knight is a person Chris used to play with, and devise these characters and worlds with back when they were still around. There's someone they would promise to save, no matter what it takes, no matter what role they have to serve. To just come out and say it, what I'll be arguing today will be assuming that the Roaring Knight is December Holiday. While other Knight candidates could work for this, Des provides the strongest general argument alongside simply slotting into this concept the best. While some evidence will be provided, This video isn't meant to argue for Death Knight, but more to pose a concept that explains what Death as the Roaring Knight is. Which is to say, that she might just be another Chris. To approach what that actually means, we have to start with what defines Chris when viewed from a more meta perspective. And what defines them is us. The existence of the player as a diegetic part of the world is the most crucial aspect of Deltarune's meta-narrative. As said prior, this game is trying to provide commentary on what it means to us and what it means to be us. To accomplish this, it draws a clear line between you and the world, between the cage and the caged. It's easy to miss at first, as the game employs more than its fair share of subtlety, but a fair bit of bluntness as well,
I'm the angel!
About who and what you are. It's not saying your name, but it's motioning in your direction. This game accounts for your existence and expects you to feel things about your role in it before the first second of gameplay. As was also said prior, there's a certain game that came before Deltarune that did a strikingly similar thing in a strikingly similar form. Undertale, too, likes to provide commentary, but it provides a different kind of commentary to Deltarune. Instead of the separation between player and protagonist, it hones in on the subtleties of saving and loading. Instead of questioning if your choices matter, it challenges you to find a new option hidden from the black and white outlook you're initially told. Above all, though, the way Undertale went about telling you what you are with respect to it wasn't by assuming what you thought or telling you how you feel. It was through showing these things by having someone just like you.
Flowey is the funhouse mirror that Undertale holds up directly to your face to point out just how odd it is that you feel how you do. From as early as the ruins, this killer flower is talking about how he gets you, how he knows what you are, and given a thorough enough analysis of what he says, turns out he's exactly right.
Flowey is meant to be Undertale's mouthpiece about the many concepts it deconstructs, but above all, the fading emotional investment one experiences when they start to see a game's world for what it is. As sets of numbers and lines of dialogue, as NPCs and progressible storylines that only have a set amount of outcomes. There's only so many things you can do before you've seen it all, and because of his determination allowing him to save and load at will, Flowey has seen it all. As a side note, watch this Andrew Cunningham video about this if you're interested in hearing an extensive analysis of what this means from the lens of Undertale. It is great. Flowey relishes in the power of control, but he finds equal fascination with something he can't control. Undertale's is a world that understands the depths of player curiosity, and knows the charted course ahead of you once you start to tire of it. It tugs at your heartstrings and pokes at your vulnerabilities, using Flowey as its vehicle to go against what you ultimately know to be true. That it's all fake, that this world is nothing more than a program on your desktop. But when he tells you that everyone you helped is living a happy life, that might just be enough to stop your curiosities dead in their tracks. If it isn't, though, you end up treading the path that, only when brought to its absolute, do you realize is the very same one Flowey embarked down himself to become everything you hated him for. Undertale knows it can't tell how you think. It can make some shockingly good guesses, and even does idly speculate about what might have driven you to your actions, but it can't read your mind, and its assumptions come off more as taunts than key aspects of its meta-narrative. It can't know with absolute certainty what makes you tick. So, to compensate, it takes you and makes you a character in its world. Not as you or as the one you control, but as the one you could best describe as the villain. By forcing you to come face to face with someone who does what you do, and even flipping the script by making you the one getting toyed with, it makes you realize what you're doing without it ever needing to say you're doing it. Flowey isn't the only example of this, either. The first fallen human showing up after you kill every monster and telling you about the power you've awoken within them is its own can of worms. But Flowey is the one every player is guaranteed to see, and the one who most directly mirrors you.
So, Flowey is defined by his knowledge of what you think, his embodiment of exactly what the game means to deconstruct, and above all, his similarity to you. He's a crucial piece of Undertale that the game couldn't function without, and it would no longer be itself even if it could. Meanwhile, Deltarune asks similar kinds of questions to Undertale about you and your place in its world. What are you intending to get out of this game? Do your choices matter, and does the answer to that matter? How far are you willing to go to say you've seen everything? So if Deltarune is following these same motions, does it have a Flowey?
From the moment you connect to Deltarune's world, one thing is made abundantly clear. Gaster knows who you are, and he knows how you think. Before you're even given a chance to introduce yourself, you're given the only seemingly meaningful series of choices the game has offered so far. A head, a body, legs, a gift, a blood type. Gaster knows just how crucial it is to have a form that embodies you. He knows this so well, in fact, that he asks for your creation's name before your own. And when it does come time to give your own name, if you mistakenly inputted your vessel's name to be yours, and answer with its same name again. Of course they are the same. Gaster knows how you think about the way you interact with this world, with the world of video games in general. Of course you and who you control are the same. The inputs you give control them. Their form is made in your own image. So of course that's supposed to be you. Is he completely clueless to the ways of this world specifically? To the autonomy of a vessel, to that no one can really choose who they are in this world, and that you'll ultimately end up as someone you never chose to be? That is yet to be seen. But what is known, without a shadow of a doubt, is that Gaster understands how you think about who you control. And just one game ago, in Undertale, Flowey's crucial, game-defining knowledge of how you interact with the world came from interacting with it like that himself. But Gaster isn't Flowey. His role is unique in just as many ways as it is similar to Flowey's, and such a large assumption about his character can't be fully justified as of now. There are other ways Gaster could have come across your beliefs about protagonism, even if they are speculative. Just knowing how you think isn't good enough evidence on its own that Gaster is meant to be you. So, let's look at some things that might just be good enough evidence. Spamton is one of the very few characters so far to really get to Chris. You load him into a disc, shove him into the body he prayed to, and make him big. Bigger and better than ever. But still not quite big enough. He's still held back, suspended by puppet strings and still clawing at freedom. Naturally, you can't let him take your crucial heart-shaped object, so you cut him down, string by string, to try to grant him the freedom he'd been seeking. But when that last string is cut, he falls. Those strings weren't just holding him back, they were holding him up. Susie doesn't quite get what happened, but she can tell Chris sure didn't like it. If you tell them they're okay, they don't say it convincingly. If you let them say they're not, they scream it. What is absolutely clear is that Chris relates to Spamton's struggles. Whether it's exact or not, the game goes so far in comparing their situations as to have Chris show some of their strongest emotions so far as a result of just seeing it. What isn't quite clear is exactly what that struggle is. At least, until you take a closer listen. Use the first 3 letters we got for free. Puppets, strings, hands, fingers. One of the few givens that we have about Gaster is that he's the man who speaks in hands, and that hands have been a constant symbol for identifying him for years. If Spamton's similarities to Jevil didn't spell it out enough, Gaster's fingerprints are all over Spamton's story. Why? We don't know. But how? It seems like there's a pretty clear interpretation. Those fingers, those hands, in some form, they are pulling the strings. Gaster is holding him back. After all, a puppet has to be manned by someone. There's always a puppeteer for every dancing marionette. Ironically, what it seems Chris fears most is a lack of control. That if the strings that link us to them snap, they'll fall down too. There obviously isn't the same level of control over Spamton from his strings as we give to Chris, but the explicit fear they hold about him helps to establish two crucial things. Gaster's hands are capable of holding others back from freedom in a way analogous to a puppeteer, and that reminds Chris of us, and that he's willing to do so. Regardless of how much of an observer to this world one views Gaster to be, it is beyond clear that he has gone out of his way to convene with at least Jevil and Spamton. He's willing to interact with the game's world in at least some capacity, so from the looks of it, this can't all be some hands-off experiment. Another character being the hands Spamton speaks of would directly tread over ground Gaster has been established on since Undertale. It was an important enough aspect of identifying his involvement that it was both known and told to us in 2015, and no other characters we know of have anywhere near as close a connection to hands or the game's core concepts as Gaster does. The safe assumption for now is that those strings, in some way, link back to Gaster, as it'd be odd, but not impossible, for Spamton to go from talking about the phone's hands and fingers, and then shift to a different it when describing what's actually pulling the strings. That said, it's very important to take the givens when it comes to Gaster. Everything's up in the air, and you have grounds for denying whatever aspects of his involvement that you want, but there's a reason behind every line Toby writes for him, and some of the most damning don't come from Deltarune itself. In the lead up to Chapter 1, Toby transformed the game's social accounts into darkness. 6 blank spaces for a name, and a distinct speaking style that made it abundantly obvious who this was. Aside from being a fun way to tease the game, this takeover gave us the first glimpses into Gaster's actual thoughts and motives. Many of these lines stand out, but the most pertinent to this concept is when his question of, "Have you been looking for me?" was asked, to which he also added, "I have been looking for you as well." If Deltarune's intro doesn't make it obvious enough, the you here is you, and Gaster has been seeking us out the same way we've been searching for him. He not only knows how we think, but even seems to mirror our desire to find that which is hidden, to find the very kinds of secrets that Gaster is. Every fun event, every dig through the files, every Easter egg, Gaster finds it all as fascinating as we do. He helps us refight the night, and encourages to go back and find the Shadow Mantle if we don't already have it. His traces are found with the secret bosses, the ones that aren't required. He's a scientist, after all. What to us is a fun clue at a grander mystery is the mechanics of the world Gaster's curious mind was once a part of. A world he still seems to intend to test the bounds of, even if he's not within it any longer. Gaster knows how we think. Gaster is physically similar in nature to us. Gaster seems to have no issues limiting freedom, just as we do. Gaster mirrors our thoughts on some of the most crucial aspects of what the game is deconstructing. And above all, Gaster finds us fascinating. He sees us as an equal.
There's plenty more to look at on just the meta front if you want to get more general, too. Gaster wasn't the only one to take over the game's social accounts when something released, as Flowey did the exact same thing back when Undertale first came out in 2015. And in their games themselves, they each serve as observers of you on top of mirroring you in a lot of ways, both orchestrating things in certain odd ways as they stay behind the scenes. Most notably, Gaster and Flowey are each the first characters encountered in each game. Both subvert your expectations during their first scene, and each serve as the direct introduction to the idea of the game's core concept as part of the game's world. It seems as if they're being used to fill similar roles in similar stories,
seemingly to tell those stories in similar ways. So even if they're not exactly identical, if Gaster and Flowey have ended up in similar places, it's worth looking at how Flowey got there. Maybe it'll be similar to where Gaster came from, and help us define what he is.
Flowey's apathy stemmed, in part, from the world forgetting who he was. His mother and father couldn't recognize him, and he was never lent the souls he'd need to take his old form if he even could. So, he did everything, got bored, waited, and eventually found you. Someone like him. Someone he hadn't exhausted all the possibilities of yet. And only through you could the state of the world be brought past its absolute. The barrier was shattered, and though he remained lost, something different had been achieved. Something it seems he genuinely wishes that you'd keep. Something he might have been wishing for himself, at least in a different form. Azrael Dreamer was lost, and this loss haunts every corner of Undertale's world. A broken family, an empty child's bed, statues built in his memory, and 6 buried children. The underground takes the shape it does because the king and queen lost their children, and you can feel that absence all throughout. In trying to free the world he lived in, Azrael and the human only caused those closest to them to bear a great loss. For as much as he is a mouthpiece for the meta-narrative, Flowey holds connections and bonds with the world of Undertale. He too has a dual nature, a player-paralleling mirror to your deepest-seated quirks, and the lost prince of the world's future, forcefully reshaped into something else. One a player, one a character. By no means is Flowey supposed to embody the same kind of protagonist and player dynamic that we and Chris do, though. His two natures are specifically adapted for Undertale, its world, and the concepts it deconstructs, because that's the story with the themes Flowey was meant to be a part of. There's no mentions of him being more real, just that he saw everything. While certainly not required to fulfill his function, a version of Flowey adapted to Deltarune's world may end up sharing at least some of these aspects from the narrative version of him, and Gaster does have a fair bit of this in common. A person whose life was cut short, with interest in a red soul, who still clearly had an impact on the world despite their name no longer being so loudly spoken. A person brought back in a new form, interacting with the world in a new way, and ending up feeling some familiar way about it. But Gaster is gone. Azrael's very name doesn't cause the game to restart. He's remembered, with clear artifacts of who he was still considered valued. He's mourned, with the only reason his tale is not much spoken being that it's tragic. He's even still physically existent, albeit in an unrecognizable state. But as it turns out, Deltarune has someone like that, too. Des Holiday was lost, and that loss is seeming more and more like the single most defining force in Deltarune's narrative. Even since before the paid release of the game, we've known the general motions of what happened to her. Both her and Chris went into the shelter, and only one of them came back. Chapter 4 decides to stop being coy and start actually requiring you to interact with the fact that Des did exist, did matter, and in some form still does. And it's looking like the future chapters will illuminate their fair share of info on her as well. Mr. Boss 3, Asgore, probably has something to do with it, as Chris doesn't want us learning the reason he resigned as police chief, and Des's mother, Carol, is actively trying to stop you from unlocking the shelter she went missing in. The number of characters that have felt her loss only seems to go up as we find out more about what happened to her. But that's who Des was. Des Holiday didn't stay lost, and her return as the Knight really feels like the Flowey to our lost girls, Azrael. First and foremost, their stories are undeniably similar in ways that feel intentional. The star child of an important family doing something that stakes their life, going somewhere out of bounds, along with the help and guidance of a close human companion. As a result, that human soul is no longer their own, and the sibling they embarked with disappears, leading to their reshaped reappearance years later. Their new form looms as an ever-present force in the background, orchestrating things behind the scenes rather than constantly confronting you outright. They act methodically, a part of a grander scheme that they intend to come to pass. And maybe, just maybe, it'll be for the good of the world. The reason why Flowey works so well narratively isn't because of how cool his mystery is, or how crafty he is, or how strong he is. Those things do play a part in what makes him himself, but it's because he bridges every aspect of the story into one concise form. Flowey's knowledge about the player and their habits helps draw you in and subvert your expectations, but the meta aspects of Undertale aren't its only aspects. He also has direct ties to almost all of the game's main cast, compelling motivations, and a story that gives him actual character weight beyond just being Toby Fox's way of criticizing you. His role as a character within the game's world is used to bridge the meta aspects of Undertale into its core story, as Flowey's character only works because of the world's mechanics, which are themselves formed around what the game is most interested in deconstructing. Flowey can truly only exist because Undertale is the game that it is. This isn't just an observation, this is the beating heart of what makes Undertale the masterpiece that it was. To a degree, the same is currently true of the Night. The Dark World is a story within the Light World, the fantastical adventures that pop up between the mundane. In the darkness, there's heroes, adventures, a prophecy, lore, and tons of quirky characters, topped off with an imposing night. But when the light begins to shine again, there's illnesses that won't go away with a simple spell, problems left unaddressed for years, broken families, and a lost girl that everything seems to link back to. Des bridges together the Light and Dark World stories all but seamlessly, and simultaneously acts as the looming, overwhelming issue in both of them for entirely different reasons. Toby is once again employing those same tactics that made Flowey the cornerstone of Undertale, as by forming his main villain around the world that they're a part of, both that world and the character themselves can be given simultaneous depth that seeps into every pore of the narrative and enhances every aspect of the story. The only thing the Night is currently missing is that role as a meta bridge, but that role seems to be served by someone else currently. Someone very, very similar to the Night. A lost girl, someone whose absence can be felt, a taboo name, one whose true fate has become obscured and shrouded in shadow. In a mundane sense, a musician, a creator, and one who has lost themselves to darkness. Hold hands, prominent eyes, and monochromatic black and white. Just what exactly is the Roaring Night?
This is where we enter true theory territory, but that's no excuse to stop thinking about Deltarune as both a proper narrative and a piece of meta storytelling. Just keep in mind that things are going to be a bit less analytical and a bit more speculative from here on out, and might rely on some assumptions that you disagree with. But such is the nature of a theory. There is no answer to what the Night is, as there is no method by which a being like the Night could even exist by the mechanics of the world we currently know. And we're already starting with those assumptions. Speaking with a very rigid interpretation, it can't be a lightner, because even in the Dark World, lightners can't turn into balls or roar with exposed rib cages, or it would kill them. When you and your side chick made frozen chicken, he had to go to the hospital to defrost. By that same merit, it can't be a darkner either, because it moves around in the Light World, and no way for that to be possible is known either. Exceptions need to be made, so for the context of this theory, we'll be making an exception to one of those two rules. Given the allusions to the Night being a lightner, all of the evidence for Death's Night, how well it works with the story, and the fact that the Knight's head is called a helmet, implying its dark exterior as some kind of armor, the assumption that seems most in line with how Deltarune has gone about portraying the stark difference between reality and fiction is to assume that the Night is, in some way, the physical body of a lightner. Death's Holiday. To me, Deltarune seems more concerned with keeping fiction and reality split and abiding by the rules of darkners being unable to enter the Light World than it is with upholding that lightners are harmed by physical damage in the Dark World. This can work with other interpretations, but this theory will be assuming that the Night is a lightner with some kind of special quality, as even if we're making assumptions, I don't feel comfortable saying that the Night is a secret third thing without substantial reason to believe it. That said, the Night being Des doesn't really answer too many of the questions about it on its own, And dismissing the rest of the lingering questions to things we can't know yet is, while technically true, not entirely accurate. We've already established that both Gaster and Des as the Roaring Knight have a lot in common with Flowey's two natures, so if we continue trying to draw connections between them all, we might just be able to predict where things with Gaster and the Knight will end up going. While the exact specifics couldn't be known until the endgame, pieces were laid out about Flowey in Undertale's first half, so maybe, if we look at things from the right lens, we can put those pieces together ahead of time. Flowey served a very specific function as both an important character and a mirror to the player, allowing the game to say things about the typical assumptions of players without needing to rely on how you, the actual player, actually feel, alongside working those thoughts into the narrative in a natural way. Given how much Des and Gaster have in common with Flowey's character and player sides respectively, maybe the two of them, in some form, are Toby's way of doing something similar in Deltarune. Now, Deltarune will not be a complete retread of its predecessor in every way, but as I hope to have made clear so far, these two games have already shown to employ similar methods of telling their stories. Toby absolutely knew what he was doing when laying out all these pieces, so if we can figure out why he did it the first time, maybe we can figure out what he's doing this time. So, this section, this theory, will be an attempt at exactly that. Trying to create a compelling explanation for both the Knight and Gaster that aligns with how similar they already are to Flowey, and how Flowey went about bridging Undertale's story and meta elements together. To clarify, we're not so much concerned with figuring out that a character like Flowey exists, as we are an element of the story like Flowey. We're not looking for Flowey the man, we're looking for Flowey the idea. Of course, the natural first question is if something like Flowey, someone like us, would fit in Deltarune. And to be completely upfront, we don't have a perfect answer for that. It's undeniable that Gaster has the same kind of knowledge of the player's mindset that Flowey did, and that Des as the Knight ties together many aspects of the game's story in the same way that Flowey did. But we don't know for certain if either of them think exactly like we do. Back when I discussed Gaster, I did present a fair bit of evidence that he might, but I'll absolutely concede that it could all end up going a different direction than I expect. Deltarune has been following in Undertale's footsteps so far, but nothing is set in stone confirming that it'll keep doing that. Evidencing a theory off of mainly parallels back to a previous game is a dicey thing, but even despite all of this, I do think that enough odd similarities already hold that applying some kind of theoretical lens to them isn't entirely unfounded. With that in mind, our goal will be to identify what caused Flowey to work as well as he did, and work out what form something like him would take in Deltarune, based on the aspects of the player Flowey took from, and what the equivalents to those characteristics are in Deltarune. Basically, we're going to try to find out what made Flowey work, and see if Deltarune might be going for what Flowey did too. If we're lucky, we might even find a way to slot both Gaster and the Knight into that dynamic to explain why they both are the way that they are, and maybe even give us a decent answer to what the Knight is from both a narrative and writing perspective. However, as established, we can't know for certain if this will be the case, so we have to rely on what I would consider to be the big assumption we'll be working with for the rest of the theory, which is that Deltarune will continue to follow in Undertale's footsteps as it has done so far, and will have someone like Flowey. Have a parallel to, or someone who thinks like, the player. It's not like there's nothing leading me to this assumption, that's what the video has been about so far and will continue to be about, but I figure it's good to just come out and say that, yeah, I can't confirm this with 100% certainty. If that's the thing that breaks this concept for you, I understand, as there's no way of knowing if things will continue to be like Undertale, or even be like Undertale in the exact way I describe. This game does not need a player parallel, nor is there perfect evidence that one exists. But there also isn't anything saying one can't exist, and I believe that the stage is set for someone just like us to exist. Knowledge of our mindset exists within the game's world, and given how important that was in Undertale, I imagine it'll need to be explained somehow. There's a very striking difference between the meta and standard aspects of this game's narrative, and they would benefit from having someone there to connect them.
The specifics of what the game thinks we believe have only been implied so far, and Undertale did not hold back in directly showing you what it thought players like you thought. The seeds are sown for another Flowey to grow. If we didn't have reason to connect Gaster and Des back to Flowey as much as we already do, I would probably be more hesitant to believe all this myself, but with the evidence I've shown in the previous sections alongside many other odd similarities between these games that I don't have time to discuss, and that's saying something, I can't help thinking that these two games' connections won't be stopping anytime soon. Deltarune is described as Undertale's parallel story, and it's telling its story in a lot of the same ways. So if you'll humor me, let's go as far as we can, and see just how many parallels we can draw. If we're on board with that another Flowey is possible, I can finally tell you what this whole video has been about, the form I think they'll take, and what my theory actually is. Des Holiday, the Roaring Knight, is being controlled by Gaster in a way that mirrors our control of Chris. The bulk of the evidence for this, to me, does not come in the form of things Deltarune has already told us. There's undeniably hints along the way if you look at things assuming that this is true. The knight has holes in its hands, Des is already similar to Gaster as is, Gaster is aware of protagonist control, our thoughts on it, and seems to almost directly connect us to a protagonist. The knight acts like and resembles Chris, our protagonist. The puppet scarf, made out of the same strings that held back Spamton, the same ones Chris feared, are described by Noelle as like guitar strings, and there's this weird eye thing in the knight's chest, right where Chris's soul is, that seems really out of place. Why is that there? But all of that really only makes sense if you look at it believing this idea to begin with. The thing that made me realize this concept in the first place was actually by looking back at how Undertale handled its core concept. I wouldn't have established that we'd be drawing connections between these two games, wouldn't have spent half a Deltarune theory talking about Undertale, if we weren't going to draw some connections. You might already see bits and pieces of where this is going, but I plan to go pretty deep and explain why this would work, within the bounds of our player parallel assumption, of course. So, let's dissect what made Undertale work so well, and then apply it to Deltarune. Let's break this down with our first, largest, and only diagram. Okay, put everything aside for a moment. Let's build Undertale from the ground up. Saving systems in games are typically a convenience to mark your progress, but they also open the door to making you feel like you have no consequences, because any errors can be undone by a simple reset. This additionally results in emotional investment in the world fading after enough time playing. Undertale realized this, and wanted to subvert it, and figured the best way to do so was to introduce saving and loading as a diegetic concept. This power existing within the game's world, and your choices being remembered in ways other games don't remember them, inches the game ever closer to being able to provide the commentary it wants to about the meta-concepts it wants to. However, even by the game having this concept be diegetic, stating how the player feels is impossible. Their actions in the game can be responded to, but it can't ever know how you feel. The game cannot provide direct commentary about your thoughts and feelings, without taking things a step further. That step further was Flowey, who possesses the ability to save and load, and abuses it just like the player does, shown in his required battle in neutral, or his speaking about himself saving in No Mercy, and many other optional times. By allowing Flowey to save and load, the game now has a potential mouthpiece for how its core concept affects all players. All it has to do is write Flowey feeling the way it believes players typically do about its core concepts. And thus, the player parallel is born. The game is now able to sidestep saying that you do this by having someone present in the story that's doing what you do, so it can allude to how you interact with its core concept without making bold assumptions about your feelings. It never has to say, you did this, so you felt that, because it can say, Flowey did, so Flowey felt. However,
Undertale isn't just a commentary on the habits of players. It's a story, too, with a rich plot, diverse and memorable characters, and a unique world suited to what it wants to say. Its world was notably built around the concept of saving and loading existing within it. Likewise, Flowey wasn't just a meta-commentary on your habits as a player, he was a crucial character in Undertale's world, with relevant connections to a majority of its other cast members for reasons entirely separate from his role as a mirror to the player. In this, Flowey acts as what I would call a meta-bridge character, one who links together the world and meta aspects of the game he's a part of by being someone crucial to both. As a brief recap, Flowey is Asriel Dreamer, the son of two of the game's most important characters whose death caused the Underground to take the shape that it has. However, his revival, an event in the game's narrative, gave him access to the game's core concept, which he used in ways similarly to how the game expects you to, and allowed him to feel the way the game wanted you to, so it could deconstruct how it thinks you usually act, without the player ever needing to feel that way about its core concepts directly. As a result, the full message the game wants to convey comes across to the player, you get the satisfaction of connecting the dots about what Flowey represents, and no assumptions about your exact feelings need to be made, meaning there's no chance your immersion is broken. Even if the typical assumptions of players were different and that layer of commentary was removed, Flowey still works as a character, given Undertale's world and its rules. And this, right here, is what I think makes Undertale work so well. A narrative and a meta-commentary, both inseparably linked by a character that bridges them both, and most importantly, one that it can know the thoughts of, one that it doesn't need to assume the feelings of for its story and commentary to come across without a hitch. As a reminder, the player cannot slot into Flowey's place, because we are not a part of the game. Flowey mirrors what the game expects us to think, and we may end up acting like him, but it can't know or rely on that for certain. Solely the player cannot be used to display what players typically think, because this player might not be a typical player, and is especially not a character within the game's world. Now that might sound silly to say, but it's worth mentioning, because Deltarune complicates things. And though it complicates things, we're gonna try to get it to end up looking a similar way. Now, we'll build up from the ground to Deltarune, and see if the Flowey formula applies here. Deltarune shares many aspects of Undertale, including the dual nature of its narrative. It's both a story and a meta-commentary on the habits of video game players, in this case commentary on that players often project onto the character they control, and assume that this character is them. This is evidenced in the intro, the very apparent subtext of the Weird Root, and in that Chris, our protagonist, often acts without us, and displays their independence at least once per chapter. I don't think that statement is very controversial, so I won't expand much more on it than I already have. As a result of this, instead of saving and loading, Deltarune chose player control of a protagonist as its core meta-concept. As an equivalent to the world of Undertale responding to saving and loading being used in various different ways, Deltarune's world responds to the fact that you are not who you control. There are other ways that this has been done, such as the player's role as the angel, or an angel of prophecy, but the primary way that this has been displayed so far is through Chris Dreamer, a character in the game's world who does link our control of them, and thus the game's core concept, into the main narrative. So are they Deltarune's meta-bridge character? Are they Deltarune's Flowey? Well, yes and no. Chris undeniably bridges aspects of the game's main meta-concept into its primary narrative, but they do not do it in the way Flowey does, which means that if Deltarune does have a Flowey, they can't be that Flowey. Chris is an important player in the narrative with a direct connection to the game's core meta-concept, but they don't feel how we do about character control. They feel quite the opposite. They also notably lack an equivalent to the player's use of the game's core meta-concept. This isn't the end of their story, though, because Chris isn't alone, and that is very important to this game's core concept specifically. Chris isn't just Chris. It's in this distinction between player and protagonist that we make a major adaptation to this chart for Deltarune. There isn't a single person situated at the center, there's two. Deltarune's core meta concept inherently comes in two halves, a player and a protagonist. Undertale did not differentiate much between the player and their player character, at least not to the degree of Deltarune, so this distinction is only necessary here, as saving and loading, Undertale's equivalent to Deltarune's player-protagonist stuff, draws a line between you and the world, not between you and your protagonist. Even with this distinction, things still do not work out, as Chris's player is the player, and the game cannot assume that any given player feels how it thinks typical players do, because that will not always be true. If the game started assuming what Chris's soul thought, and acted like that's how we, the player, thought, it'd be pretty immersion-breaking. Thankfully, this is actually a really good basis to build off of, even if it's not exactly what we're looking for. This is the same kind of basis that could have led to the creation of Flowey, as we can clearly see the things that involving the player directly prevents us from doing. And just like with Undertale, the biggest issue is that the player's thoughts and feelings cannot be assumed with total accuracy. The player can exist in the game's world, and we very much do, but how we feel about the world still isn't something it can know. So, rather than trying to change what form Deltarune's Meta-Bridge character will take to try to make Chris fit this role, let's assume that they aren't this character. The two at the center are us. You and what they call you. If we assume that Deltarune will have a Flowey, which is what we're doing in case I wasn't clear about that, then we'll have to find two characters that each mirror one half of our player-protagonist dynamic with Chris. One player, one in control, and one protagonist, one being controlled, to slot into the middle. A second player-controlling protagonist duo would fill the same role as Flowey and his blatant use of saving and loading, as both directly utilize the game's core meta-concept, in this case protagonist control, in a form that isn't you, and would allow for commentary to be provided about it without your actions ever being directly relied upon. Ideally, both characters we slot in will also connect back to the game's world in a similar manner to how Flowey did, as that was one of the most crucial aspects of working Undertale's core concept into that game's primary narrative. Without any other assumptions about this game or the characters within it, aside from that this will happen at all and that Deltarune will even have someone like Flowey, this is where we stand at the present. If Deltarune was going to have an equivalent to Flowey adapted for its story with its core concept, this is kinda sorta the base criteria I'd expect them to fill. Note that I say that the protagonist doesn't need to think like their player does, because our protagonist, Chris, doesn't seem to think like we do, and in fact seems to actively disagree with our assumptions about them. That doesn't mean a protagonist parallel won't, or that they can't, just that it's not necessary. One character thinking like us is more than enough to provide commentary about how we think, as only one half of this dynamic actually represents us, the one playing. You could additionally argue that the one in control doesn't need to feel anything about the characters in universe and vice versa, as long as they remain outside of the game's world like the player does, but the entire point of a player parallel is that they're a character that exists within the game's world. So I'll assume that even the player of this dynamic has emotional connections to the game's world as a result, though really what's most important is just that they mirror a typical player's thoughts and assumptions on its core concept, and what the game deconstructs. Regardless, even the non-Flowey characters in Undertale's world still felt things about the player saving and loading, and how the one that could save and load felt about the game's world was an extremely important part of what Undertale wanted to deconstruct. Assumedly, a character that slots into this dynamic would be a character with relevant connections to the world even outside of their role as player, as that's what Flowey was, but we'll leave it up to interpretation for now. It isn't confirmed that they need to. So, to briefly recap, if Deltarune was gonna have a Flowey, they'd mirror us and Chris, because control of a protagonist, of which Chris is ours, is the most important meta aspect of this game, and is the equivalent to Flowey being able to save and load in Undertale, What we're trying to do is to allow for someone in this game's story to mirror the player by interacting with the world the same way we do, as that's the most crucial part of what made Flowey work so well. These characters, our player parallel and protagonist parallel, would additionally link together the primary and meta-narratives, allowing the game's core concept to be introduced in a form that is not the player, who may now use the core concept in the way the game wants us to for it to provide its commentary, once again, just like Flowey. I should have named this another Flowey. And all of that? That was the simple version. I didn't even talk about the themes of Deltarune's narrative, its divide of reality and fiction, or any of the equivalents to those ideas in Undertale. I cut a lot out, and rest assured, I'm aware that I cut a lot out. I hope that this doesn't seem like cherry-picking, but I do need to focus on the aspects of these games specifically relevant to this concept. If there were any major holdups, or times where the logic we're assuming holds didn't hold, I would have mentioned them. But the only things in the way of assuming that this is all true are other assumptions. That said, this template is not how Toby Fox made these games, and deviations from this are to be expected. This isn't how the game has to go for it to be good, nor am I claiming that it is. Even still, I do personally think that this is accurate. That if Deltarune had a Flowey, this is basically how they'd slot into the game. A duo of characters, one resembling us that shares our thoughts about what a player is meant to be, and one resembling Chris, that shares a lot of strong connections to the important players of the main story, as those are the aspects of us and Chris that the game has highlighted as most important. Once again, feel free to disagree, but this is what I'll be running with, and I encourage you to hold out until the end if you haven't given up already. So now that you know what this theory is about, you probably already know who I think fits into this dynamic. But do they actually work? As for the player side, Deltarune has already shown us someone who is acutely aware of our thoughts as a player, holds the same kinds of similarities to us that Flowey did, and almost inarguably occupies the same meta role that Flowey did, regardless of if he's a player parallel. Gaster. Gaster appears to be outside of the game's world, much like us, and speaks to us directly about things above the game's world, but holds emotional connections to characters within it, which is a big stamp on our Flowey bingo card. He also has definitive connections to the game's core concepts, and if Gaster's the one pulling Spanton's strings, then he might even already be controlling characters in some sense. He's definitely doing some kind of behind-the-scenes orchestration either way, as his fingerprints can be found in almost as many places as Flowey's could. However, one of the most major things that Gaster currently lacks is presence in the main narrative, as he is shattered. But him controlling a character like this would not only bridge his beliefs about this world, shown to be similar to ours, into the main narrative, allowing for them to be more directly deconstructed as was the case with Flowey, but would additionally grant him a physical form to take in the game's story that aligns with his shattered nature. He can show up without showing up, do things that impact the world without being a part of it, just like the player, in the same way that makes us so important. More on this in the next section though, because if Gaster is a player, he'd need a protagonist, and I imagine my choice there is clear as day. Who aside from Gaster has these same kinds of parallels to Flowey, and the character side of Flowey's dual nature? Who else acts as a bridge between the two overarching stories that their game is intending to tell? Who has such strong ties to Gaster, narratively, symbolically, and thematically? Who else experienced the same kinds of loss of self and persistence in a different form to both Flowey and Gaster? Des. Des Holiday, the Roaring Knight, gains the sole aspect of Flowey that they had been missing. That crucial link to the meta-narrative, now bridging even Gaster into the main story with that same brilliant storytelling technique Toby used to great success in Undertale. The Knight's connections back to Flowey as an element of the proper narrative make even more sense, as they're doing the same kind of bridging that Flowey was. Every major important character has some kind of strong feeling about Des, and even those that don't do have strong feelings about the Knight. And This finally helps make sense of exactly why Chris and the Knight have the similarities they do. Why those parallels have already been drawn. It's beyond them just being childhood friends. They're prophetic foils, each given their true powers by the angelic light above and the darker darkness below. They pose and act similarly, not just because they looked up to her, but because they're each trapped in the same fate. It helps make sense of the lyrics she wrote. Our heart isn't a demon, it's an angel. It's the arc that guides the heroes on their way. The demon heart mentioned by Raise Up Your Bat isn't our own, and the one in control of her has been referencing Satan since 2015. And maybe, in some sense, if she's as conscious under that helmet as Chris under our control, then given their similar situations, she likely knows she's the only one working with the real Chris. Because she's another Chris. To recap and simplify all of that, if Gaster controls the Knight, a duo similar to the player and Chris would be revealed that both conforms with what the game has already presented, as Gaster and Des are both similar and connected even if this concept doesn't hold true, and would provide the same kind of element of the narrative to Deltarune as Flowey did to Undertale. One who embodies the game's core meta concept and the typical assumptions of players without being the player themselves, and who can bridge that concept into the main story because the conditions of the game's world made them that way. Alright, great. So why? Beyond just being kinda cool, why would this be the route Deltarune actually ends up going? Unfortunately, the most concise way to answer that question is also something that you could view as a major criticism. It's just Flowey again. If I had to take one guess at the most controversial part of what I'm arguing here, it would be that it's too similar to Undertale. Deltarune, it's not a filled-out template. The lack of a bishop confirmed that much. It's not a 2016 AU that creates new versions of the exact same characters with the exact same roles. It's a new story, with new mechanics distinct from Undertale, that'll do things it never could have. Would Toby really base Deltarune around Undertale so directly? Don't get me wrong, I've wondered that too, and I promise it's not as bad as you think. If what you disagree with is that the Knight isn't autonomous, or that Gaster will be the next Flowey, or that Deltarune will even have a player parallel, I don't think I can make those concerns go away. Once again, at some point, it's gonna come down to assumptions. And I think we passed that point back when I pulled out a diagram on you. Consider this section less of an argument, and more of, here's how I think about it. Regardless of what specific variety of Death Knight you believe, it's undeniable that the concept has some pretty striking similarities to Undertale, right? I mean, scratch all the controlled crap, and you're still left with a lost sibling that ventured with the soul of their human companion to a region outside their traditional home, which caused them to go missing before they came back in an unrecognizable state. That's a pretty specific connection to draw, right? Even if you're not big on Death Knight, Carol Knight is as much a retread of Asgore as Des is to Asriel, and you could argue a non-Lightner Knight that's based on Des's traits is actually more of a direct Flowey parallel. It's not like Toby's trying to hide Deltarune's similarities to Undertale anyways, but it almost seems like things are modeled around Undertale in some way. Core meta concepts, knowledge of the player, deconstruction of JRPG tropes, a world beneath, an adventure back to the light, someone who's been lost. Astute viewers may know where I could go with this, but I'm going to turn this a different direction and say that there's a pretty easy to nail down and relatively obvious reason for Toby to make a parallel story. To make a game like Undertale again. Because it worked the first time. Hear me out on this one. It's easy to forget given how long ago it came out, but Undertale released as an indie game with hardly any funding or following whatsoever. It was partially programmed in a basement. The way people were first exposed to Undertale and its rich, subversive world wasn't sans stronger than you like I was. It was by playing it. And a lot of people played it. Undertale was massively successful, not just because of its quirky characters and memorable dialogue and the secrets hidden away within, but because it's an immaculately well-crafted story that understands how to budget its time. Select bits of the writing are a little rough around the edges, but the game carried itself. It gathered all of its popularity through the sheer fact that Toby Fox knows how to make a video game. Deltarune is a very different game to Undertale, and video games can get popular without being Undertale, but it speaks to me that Toby has chosen to go about writing Deltarune in the way that he has. To seemingly retread many of the decisions he made with Undertale tells me he knows how well it worked, and believes there's more to do with some of those same concepts. It's the same reason why Gerson, Asgore, and many of Undertale's characters are coming back and being used in new and interesting ways instead of every new important character being totally original. Let's take an example of Undertale's genius particularly pertinent to this concept. Asriel Dreamer. Why did people care about Asriel Dreamer, and what made Flowey's twist work? Now, analysis is a very subjective thing. I highly doubt you agree with every single thing I've said so far, and there's no such thing as good or bad writing, and I'm not going to pretend like my opinion about Undertale is the right one. But the way I see it, and I think many agree, is that Asriel's reveal and the truth of Flowey's identity worked as well as it did because Flowey was a present force in the narrative. When the truth came out about the Dreamer Prince and how he'd passed away, not much had been spoken about him before that point, and Asriel was kinda introduced to most players as someone who was already gone. The pieces you'd gotten before that start to make some amount of sense. Why the king and queen split apart, why the war on humans was waged in the first place, but it was more of a footnote because you hadn't ever seen Asriel before. And then, right after, Flowey comes in and destroys Asgore's soul, preventing you from leaving the underground, and then steals the 6 human souls right in front of your face. Likely for the first time, you have no issues actually fighting against the monstrosity he becomes, and might even feel so little remorse for him that you outright kill him. You load back, go through the True Lab, and find out some little bits about Flowey's creation, but there's a good chance you didn't realize Flowey was Asriel until he comes on screen and spells out his name in big, bold letters.
Now, Undertale never assumed what the player was feeling, but I imagine that if you were in 2015 and playing this game blind, your reaction would probably be,
Flowey was Asriel the whole time? The reveal worked. You're given a reason to care about Flowey, then given conflicting reasons to care about Asriel, and then told to smash those feelings together because they were secretly the same character all along. The pieces along the way start to make sense. Toriel's empty bed, the talk of monster souls being the source of their compassion. Asriel's late introduction in the game fits and serves as a genius piece of storytelling because it wasn't a late introduction. He was there the whole time, and the mechanics of his existence were getting explained, but you just didn't know it.
Now remember how similar Flowey is to Des and Gaster? Does Toby have to follow these exact same steps with Gaster in the night for the game to be good? No. Do we even have a confirmed method by which Gaster could be controlling the night? No. But in a hypothetical world where things did go this way, it would, similarly to Asriel, add a physical form for both Gaster and Des to take in the game's main story way before their seemingly gonna be late introduction, at least past the halfway point, and allow them to start doing things blatantly right before your eyes, chapters before you find out who they really were. Not all players are going to be familiar with Gaster. A couple of secret events from the previous game aren't sufficient for introducing someone that's been implied to even be the reason we connect to this world at all, and a one-on-one dialogue once per chapter isn't going to cut it forever. So if the Asriel that is Gaster just directly pulls a Flowey and is secretly controlling the night the entire time, it would simultaneously introduce him in a tangible form that both the player and the characters in-world are familiar with, while harkening back to those same meta-elements of Flowey that help define Undertale's most subversive aspects, the same kinds of ones Deltarune currently shares. The same applies to Des being Gaster's Chris. She's been here the whole time,
plays the role of that crucial other half to Gaster's role as a player parallel, and completes the connection back to the player by not only being someone that a lot of characters care for, much like Chris is, but being someone that, as far as we're aware, wouldn't want to do what she's doing just as we force Chris to play the role of the hero. That's my thinking, at least. Toby probably has a different idea in mind, but I think that sounds decent. Or maybe I just want Undertale 2 and I'm way off the mark. But, I mean, that's not the only thing that convinces me of this. So, to close this out, I'll do a lightning round of some various different tidbits about how this plays into the game's themes, and places I think this could be going even if I'm wrong about the player parallel stuff. Something very much of note about the Knight is the way that they act, particularly how animated they are, how elegant they choose to be at times. They don't seem to be much of a mindless, emotionless drone like Chris can sometimes seem, even if what we visually see of Chris's reactions is often deliberately dulled. The Knight still seems to have bits of a personality intact, and while this may on the surface seem like a point against them being forcefully controlled, it's actually exactly in line with our control over Chris. In Deltarune's world, even if you control someone, you still can't fully choose who you are. Not only does Chris sometimes rip out the player's soul to fully take control, but when we tell Chris to perform specific actions, they listen, but often with their own flair, sometimes even spinning the commands we give them to leave out crucial elements of what we may have wanted. They're forced to do what we say, but they still choose how they do things. Elements of Chris's identity pour over into our actions as them, which is exactly in line with the themes of the game. While this doesn't provide a flawless explanation, some dots certainly can be connected to the Knight's apparent personality when compared back to Chris, as maybe the bits of characterization we seemingly get from the Knight serve a similar function to this equivalent in Chris. The Knight is acting the way it does, because even the one controlling them can't fully choose who the Knight is. They're forced to do what the one in control dictates, but they still get to fill in some of the blanks. It works with the established themes of our control over Chris, and helps to characterize Des, the one under the armor, even while she isn't in control. There's also the chance that Des is willingly allowing herself to be controlled, which is certainly a possibility, but is hard to say for now. Either way, the Knight's personality is by no means a wrench in the control idea, as controlling a character that still gets to decide the specifics of how they act is actually a closer connection to Chris, if anything. As for the one in control, Gaster doesn't even have to be in the exact role of a player for all of this to work. I do think it's a stronger connection if he is, but he's still blatantly in the same meta-narrative role as Flowey either way. Even if he doesn't verbatim inherit Flowey's direct possession of the game's core concept, if he's, say, the game's author or developer, or observes it all as a scientist that only steps in when absolutely necessary, him having a relation to the game's core concepts is still something we've already seen. Ultimately, this is a game about forcing a character to be someone they're not, and Gaster in any of these roles would still allow for plenty of deconstruction of that. An invasive author forcing their story onto the world, or making an iteration of the prophecy by swapping around the existing pieces, or trying to force this game to be suitable for a player like us, or manipulating the variables in his experiment to be exactly what they should be. Gaster definitely has his opinions about how the world should be, and he wants to bring about some kind of change to this world. His encounter in Chapter 4 confirms that much. All of these aspects of Gaster as an author aren't even limited to just an author. We are definitively a player, we're the one the game is deconstructing, and we can still throw the story off course through the weird route. We write things too. Force Noelle and Chris to be in roles they shouldn't be in, maybe even in the same way Gaster is doing with the Knight.
This would all also help answer a lot of the grander questions about both Des and Gaster. One of the other most telling Gaster tweets from the 2018 takeover was his admission that he looks forward to creating a new future with us. That combined with his lines at the end of Chapter 4 about his Deltarune make it pretty clear he wants something to come to pass, that he's orchestrating things in this story because he's looking for some kind of outcome, and it's something he's working for alongside the player. The only other time the term Deltarune comes up is when the prophecy is involved, so it's safe to say Gaster wants something with relation to the prophecy. Whether he wrote it and wants it to happen, didn't write it but the game's story is his iteration of it, outright wants it to be overcome, or some combination of those three isn't clear. But what is clear is that he has ties to it. It's then by no coincidence that he also has ties to the player and Knight, the two greatest bringers of light and dark that we currently know of. The Knight's goals to bring about darkness might be one and the same with Gaster's goal to see those destined events come to pass, and this would certainly explain why they don't just end the world at their earliest convenience. This is a tad more speculative, but it's a tale of light and dark, and to make that tale go your way, it sure would make sense to have the main bringers of both of those forces on your side, being controlled by you and the one you view as your equal. And even if the one you control doesn't want the story to go the way you do, is that even their call to make?
And that connects back to the Weird Root, which is yet another Flowey connection. Gaster forcefully changing the Knight's role and projecting over Dessa's identity, even if he can't fully replace it, is the same thing we do to Chris on the Weird Route, and the forceful changing of fate with the help of a Holiday Sister is just directly what the Weird Route is all about. So notice then that you only become Flowey, only get his spiel about the exact kinds of emotions that typically bring someone to exhausting all of the possibilities in a game when you go through with Undertale's most prominent and mortally dubious alternate route. Okay, we've been going on about this for a while, so let's wrap it all up with this.
What makes the player's place in this world as interesting as it is that we aren't really a good guy or a bad guy. We have a unique spot as the force that's possessed Chris, for better or for worse, but certainly aren't making them happy in any case, while also seemingly being the only reason the heroes are able to proceed. Our guidance, our light, our power is the very thing that sees our party through. That's a very complicated role, and one that inherently relies on that Deltarune is a world different from our own, where instead of being a hero, we're a god guiding the heroes. Undertale tackled similar ideas, and had to figure out a way for the player as a Time Lord to be introduced into the story without it feeling too direct, which I'm sure, as you could guess by now, it did through Flowey. Not only does he account for us, but his past actions, even if they've been reset, have still likely clued others in on some aspect of what we are, and why one like us would do what we do. Deltarune, too, will need to address us and our crucial feelings and assumptions at some point, but for the integrity of its narrative and the impossibility of assuming what all players think, it probably won't do that directly. It'll do it in the same indirect form Undertale did. Have someone just like us, who sees the world just like us. It can't determine how we feel about the world or why we do what we do, only show what our actions do to it, and respond to those. Even if it makes a few assumptions, our feelings, our choices, haven't mattered much so far, have they? There's only one ending. So, the way most in line with Undertale for Deltarune to give its commentary on the concepts it's been deconstructing since the moment you open the game is to once again hold up a mirror and force you to think about what you do when it's done by another you.
I'm Garrett. Hi. Voice reveal for my Vision Cord chuds. This is the first time I've ever used After Effects, so sorry if anything came out like any amount sloppy. There's a lot of things I don't know how to do with it, and I basically learned all of this as I went. This is also the first time I've used a good microphone, so sorry if the quality rapidly shifts at times. It was a lot worse before I went back and re-recorded all of the bad audio, and also the fourth section multiple times, but it's still probably noticeable now. Still not sure how to use this thing. I don't know. Oh, I also have college at the same time, so that's been fun. Those are my excuses if any of this doesn't make any sense. I haven't heard anyone on YouTube talk about the whole Gaster-controlled Death Knight thing before, so I wanted to give my take on the argument in favor of it to serve as a time capsule if it ends up being true or false. I think it's the best knight concept I've heard so far, but it is by no means the only option. I value parallels to Undertale a lot, so if you don't think those are as important as I do, you probably weren't as impressed by how much the idea has in common with Flowey.
I don't mean to make fake people up with fake opinions, but please don't dismiss all of this just because it's similar to Undertale. It can be similar without being the exact same game again. I promise that this idea has sauce. Speaking totally honestly, I'm not convinced of the specifics of this idea myself. Death Knight, I believe. But I don't know how I feel about Gaster as a verbatim player parallel. There's definitely something more going on with him. It's a great idea in isolation, but it doesn't feel like it slots into the game in other ways. Like, if he wrote the prophecy, then it's kind of weird for him to be, like, control. It's weird. There's a lot of possibilities. I hope I address properly that he is still an author, because regardless of how many similarities he has to the player, he is absolutely an author. He's writing things, but so are we. So the player's an author too. That's my excuse. The same applies to all the Chris can't deconstruct this stuff alone stuff. Like, I say that confidently, but I know if Toby wanted to, he so could just do what Flowey did with Chris. It wouldn't be as blatant as Flowey, but maybe Deltarune will just be more subtle. Or maybe it'll have Gaster as a game developer that wonders why you don't like the game because, oh, you're overwriting Chris's identity. What? I thought you would want to do that because you are who you control. I'm still not sure how he would come to realize that if he doesn't think like us, but that's, like, you know, you didn't learn about Flowey and where he came from until the True Lab. We're like halfway through Deltarune, if even, so not knowing all of Gaster's true, like, motivations is probably for the best. Yeah, I'm just assuming that Deltarune is gonna do what Undertale was doing, because it has been doing that so far, and there's a lot of connections back to Undertale that I think are pretty hard to deny if you see them. Might link to a video about that if my friend has made it yet. If it is, it's in the top right. If not, I'll link it when he's done with it. If any of that was the thing that stopped you from believing this, I understand. I don't have perfect answers, but I think that this is a relatively good argument, all things considered. You can tear me to shreds in the comments, I'll handle it, but, like, I think that this is pretty good. And this argument has changed a lot, even while I've been, like, working on this. Like, I had section 1 completed, and then I went back and completely rewrote the script for section 4 to allow for that diagram, which, once again, I hope that it, like, was conveyed properly, that this is not how the game has to go. This is assuming that Undertale will just directly be followed, which there is reasonable evidence to believe will be the case, and I could present that evidence for you if you really wanted to see it, but it wasn't really relevant here outside of what I did present. So, you know, if you're curious, ask me, I'll reply to you, but, like, for the sake of brevity, for the sake of time, I didn't want to spend another 20 minutes talking about every single parallel between these games. Once again, though, I do know that this is, like, not the only outcome for the game at all. This is just, if Deltarune has a Flowey, this is how I think it would go. And I think it's a good idea for that. It's just that that idea itself isn't 100% confirmed. I hope all the talk about needing to make assumptions doesn't read as me wimping out with this. I think of it more as just actually addressing it how it is, but if you viewed it as me backing down, I do get that, but that's not how I'm thinking about it. Maybe it's how it's coming across, but hopefully it didn't hamper the viewing experience too much. I do hope in any case that you took something away from this. Like, I hope that all of what I said, there was at least, like, something in there that made any sense. The techniques that Toby used to tell Undertale's story are fascinating, and I think that they deserve even more analysis than I'm giving them here, because I'm hyper-fixating on one point. Like, I'm just talking about Flowey with this, and all the things that he does for the game, and Azrael, and how Azrael ties everything together, and it's like that just seems to be what Death Knight is going to be doing. Like, I mentioned the Andrew Cunningham video in, like, the first 10 minutes. The whole, like, that is so good. Please go watch that. Like, I think that's what, like, that's really what made me first realize a lot of the importance of this meta stuff. I doubt I'm ever gonna get anywhere close to that. Like, I do not think that this is on that same level by a long shot. But looking at Toby's past storytelling methods was what inspired this idea in the first place, even back in, like, the Chapter 2 days. Like, I... Just thinking about the connections between Des and Gaster, and, like, drawing those similarities, and, like, what if Deltarune does what Undertale did and has the main antagonist be a player again, where Flowey was doing saving it. I'm just describing the video. You just watched it. It's you know what I'm talking about. Okay, even if I'm totally wrong with all this, hopefully someone somewhere is gonna realize what the actual purpose of all of these connections back to Undertale is, and prove me wrong gloriously by actually, like, figuring it out. I encourage you to poke holes in this idea and tell me the things that don't make sense, because I don't want to keep believing that this is a good idea when it's really not. If there's a huge contradiction that you notice that I didn't, comment about it. Odds are I'm gonna read it, and odds are you're probably right. Thank you for giving this, like, any amount of attention at all. I'm a newbie. I'm a noob. I'm a YouTube noob. That rhymes. I doubt that this is gonna do, like, great, but I'm not intending to, like, take off as a YouTuber. This is just a passion project. This is a hobby, and one that I'm, like, new at. I don't think you're ever gonna see ads on anything I make, even, like, if I even make anything else. Whatever a potential next video would be about, it probably won't be as heavily edited. If you have any ideas and think I'm uniquely suited to explain them, feel free to comment about that too. I will maybe take suggestions, no promises, because I really only have the passion to work on things that I really, really want to say, like this. Okay, yeah, I think that's everything. Yeah, that's all for now. Comment any concerns. And yeah, bye.